The candles were lit. The cake was still warm. My son's smile was brighter than the decorations on the wall. I remember his little voice saying, "Mommy, this is the best birthday ever," as he stood there in his blue paper crown, his eyes full of wonder. I had spent 3 nights baking that cake, hand-rolling the fondant decorations, blowing up the balloons by myself after work, just so he would feel special, just so he would feel normal, just so, for one day, I could pretend that the fear didn't live with us. Then it happened. 3 knocks. Heavy, sharp, final. They didn't sound like any knock I had heard before. It was the kind that stops all movement in a room, the kind that makes your soul sit up before your body reacts. Everyone froze. The music kept playing softly in the background, a cheerful song about birthdays and happiness, but nobody was listening anymore. Not even the kids. Not even my son. I opened the door, and everything disappeared. 2 men, black jackets, badges, and a piece of paper with my name printed on it. Lucía Martínez? That's all they said. They didn't look angry. They didn't yell. They didn't even seem surprised. Just another job for them. Just another name on a list. I nodded before I could even think. My hands began to tremble. My mouth tried to form words, but my body was already ahead of me, stepping outside like it knew this day would come. Like it had always known. The cuffs clicked around my wrists like they were meant to be there. Inside, Mateo stood still, one hand holding a balloon, the other slightly raised as if he was about to wave or reach for me. His little mouth opened, but no sound came out. He just stared. His eyes weren't confused. They were broken. 8 years old, and already learning that safety can vanish in a second. One of the other moms at the party rushed to hold him as the agents guided me down the steps. I wanted to scream, to pull away, to tell them it was a mistake, but I couldn't speak, because deep down, I knew it wasn't. I had lived in the shadows for too long. I had stayed under the radar, changed addresses, avoided hospitals, refused friendships that went too deep, all to avoid this exact moment. And yet, no matter how hard I tried to be invisible, here I was, in handcuffs, on my son's birthday. I heard a child crying. I don't know if it was mine. It didn't matter. The sound pierced through me like a blade. As the agents placed me in the back of their vehicle, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. I didn't look like a criminal. I looked like a mother who had failed. Not because I did something wrong, but because this system was built to break people like me. People who came here not to steal, but to survive. To clean houses and raise children and bake birthday cakes that would never be finished. The drive was silent. I wasn't crying. Not yet. The tears would come later, in a place with no privacy, no dignity, no warmth. But for now, all I could do was replay the moment. Mateo's face, the balloon in his hand, the candles still burning on the cake. They didn't let me blow them out. They didn't even let me say goodbye. The van turned a corner, and the house disappeared from view. But that moment, that instant, when joy turned to terror, would stay with me forever. Not just as a memory, but as a scar, a mark that would never heal. That day was supposed to be about him, about laughter and gifts and childhood. And yet, the gift he got was trauma. The surprise? Watching his mother disappear in front of everyone he loved. I don't remember how long the drive was. I just remember arriving at a gray building with no windows and too many locks. They processed me quickly, like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Like I was just one more body, one more file, name, date of birth, country of origin, mother of one. No criminal record, no previous arrests, no rights. They took my fingerprints, my shoes, my earrings. They handed me a thin jumpsuit and told me to change in front of a stranger. No privacy, no hesitation, just cold instructions. That's when I started shaking. I wasn't cold. I was broken, stripped down to nothing, not a woman, not a mother, not even a person. Just a number in a system that doesn't ask who you are, only where you came from and how quickly they can send you back. As I sat in a holding cell that night, surrounded by other women with the same empty eyes, I thought about the cake. I wondered if anyone cut it, if Mateo cried when I didn't come back to sing, if someone took the candles out, or if they melted all the way down until the wax burned the frosting. That thought destroyed me, because birthdays are supposed to be safe. They're supposed to be memory makers, not memory breakers. But for my son, October 5th will never be just a birthday again. It will always be the day his mom disappeared in front of him. The day joy was swallowed whole by fear. If you've ever felt this kind of fear, the kind that lives in your bones, that follows you even in sleep, I want you to know you're not alone. Drop a comment below with the words, "I know this fear," because your story matters. And maybe, together, we can remind the world that behind every number, there's a name, there's a mother, there's love. And if you believe these stories need to be told, subscribe to this channel. Every time you click that button, you're giving voice to someone who's been silenced too long. My name is Lucía Martínez. I am 36 years old, and for the last 19 of those years, I have lived in Dallas, Texas. You wouldn't notice me if we crossed paths. I am quiet. I keep my head down. I clean houses that don't belong to me and bake cakes I never get to taste. I live simply and try not to ask for much. But what you might not see is the strength it took to stay here. The strength it takes every single day to be invisible and still survive. I came here when I was just 17. No English, no money, no plan, except one: stay alive. Back in Oaxaca, life had stopped making sense. My stepfather touched me when my mother wasn't looking. I told her once, just once. She slapped me so hard I couldn't hear out of my left ear for 2 days. I never spoke of it again. Silence became my shield, and shame became my shadow. So I left. I crossed the border hidden in the back of a truck. I don't even remember the name of the man who helped me. He just said, "Keep your eyes down. Don't speak unless I say so, and don't stop walking until you see the fence." We walked through the desert for hours. My feet bled inside my shoes. My throat was so dry I licked the sweat off my lips. But I kept going. When I arrived in Texas, I slept on the floor of a stranger's apartment. I washed dishes in restaurants that reeked of grease and ammonia. I cleaned motels that smelled of strangers and regret. I sent half of everything I earned back home. My mother never asked how I got the money. She just said thank you. And that was enough. For a while. But I was alone. Completely alone. Until Mateo. I was 28 when I found out I was pregnant. His father was American. I met him cleaning his cousin's apartment. He flirted with me in broken Spanish, and I answered in broken English. It felt innocent at first. He brought me flowers once, told me he liked my laugh. Then he disappeared the day I told him about the baby. Changed his number. Vanished like smoke. I cried for 3 days. Not because I missed him, but because I was terrified. How would I raise a child with no papers, no family, and no way to give him what he deserved? But from the moment Mateo was born, everything changed. I held him in my arms and promised him 2 things. 1, I would never leave him. 2, I would never let the fear I carried become his burden. He was a quiet baby, watchful, as if he knew the world wasn't safe. As he grew, he asked questions like, "Why can't we go to the doctor like my friends?" Or, "Why do we move so much?" I lied to him. I said, "Because we like to explore." I told him we were adventurers, that our life was like a storybook, but stories are supposed to have heroes, and I never felt like one. Our lives were built on routines that looked ordinary, but were carefully designed for survival. I only worked for families I trusted. I never let anyone into our apartment. I paid for everything in cash. We didn't have a car, too risky, too visible. Instead, I walked miles every day, pushing Mateo in a stroller I bought at a secondhand store for $5. In the Texas heat, the pavement felt like it could burn through the soles of my shoes. But we kept walking, because walking meant we were still free. At night, I would check the locks on the door 3 times. I taught Mateo what to do if someone knocked too hard. "Go to the closet," I said, "and don't come out until I say your name twice." He didn't ask why. He just memorized the rule. Because in our world, asking too many questions could be dangerous. Still, I tried to make his childhood as bright as I could. Every birthday, I baked a cake from scratch. Even when we couldn't afford gifts, I would fill balloons with little notes. "You are strong. You are brave. You are my miracle." He collected them in a shoebox under his bed, said they helped him sleep. One Christmas, I made him a gift out of recycled cardboard and fabric scraps. It was a pretend laptop so he could feel like the kids at school. He didn't laugh. He hugged me and said it was perfect. That was Mateo. Always grateful, always kind. But kindness doesn't protect you from what you can't see coming. We lived in the margins. We smiled at neighbors, but never got too close. We sang songs in the kitchen, but turned off the music if the phone rang. Every time someone knocked on the door, my heart stopped for a beat. I never answered unless I knew who it was. I kept a packed bag in the closet. Not with money or valuables, just Mateo's birth certificate, a photo of us together, and his favorite book. If they came for me, I wanted him to remember I tried. Because fear wasn't just an emotion in our home. It was part of the furniture, worn in, familiar. When he started school, I used to stand across the street and wait until he disappeared into the building. Then I would cry quietly in the shadows, not because I missed him, but because I was terrified someone would notice he was mine, that someone would ask too many questions, that the day would come when they would ask, "Where is his father?" or "What's your immigration status?" And then it would be over. But every time he ran back into my arms, every time he brought home a drawing or a spelling test with a gold star, I told myself it was worth it. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every time I went without dinner so he could have milk in the fridge. It was worth it. Because Mateo wasn't just my son. He was my reason, my anchor, my oxygen. I wanted him to grow up believing he belonged, that he mattered, that his life had value, even if mine didn't. I wanted him to feel joy without looking over his shoulder. That's why I threw him that birthday party. It was the first time I invited more than one person into our home. The first time I let myself believe we could live like other families. I made pastel de tres leches. I strung lights around the doorway. I saved up for a month to buy a piñata shaped like a rocket ship. I wanted him to fly, even if I stayed grounded. And for a few hours, I let myself forget. I danced with him in the kitchen. I let the music play loud. I didn't check the door. I didn't hold my breath. I let us be happy. But happiness in my world is a fragile thing, a glass bubble that shatters without warning. And when the knock came, I knew it was my fault. For hoping too much. For dreaming too long. For thinking I could live without fear just because I wanted to. Now, when I close my eyes, I don't see candles or balloons. I see Mateo's face. I see his silence. I see the moment he learned that love is not always enough to protect the people we care about. If you've ever felt like your life was built on borrowed time, if you've ever looked at your child and wondered how long you can keep them safe, tell me below. Write, "I live in the shadows" in the comments. Because if you do, then you know. And if you know, then maybe together we can shine a light on the truth too many are forced to hide. And if you believe these stories deserve to be heard, subscribe. It's more than a button. It's a step toward visibility, dignity, and justice for families like mine. I still remember the night I crossed. The sky was so dark it felt like I was walking into nothing. The only sound was the crunch of dirt under our shoes and the wind pushing against our backs like it wanted us to turn around. There were 5 of us, strangers, bound by silence and desperation. No names, just breath and fear and hope. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Every one of us carried the same weight, the same reason to keep moving. We walked for hours, through dry riverbeds and thorny bushes that tore at our clothes and our skin. The guide, a young man no older than me, whispered orders like he was praying. Keep low. Don't stop. Don't look back. I didn't. I couldn't. My feet bled through my shoes. The soles were cheap, the kind you buy in a market for $2. I had wrapped my socks in plastic to keep them dry, but they didn't last. By dawn, the skin was peeling. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch, because pain was temporary. But getting caught could mean being sent back to the life I had barely escaped. I was 17. I had never been on a plane. I had never seen a city with more than 10 streets. I had never eaten pizza or worn jeans that weren't hand-me-downs from cousins who had outgrown them. But I'd seen enough to know I couldn't stay where I was. My stepfather was respected in our village, a church-going man, a builder. People said he had hands of gold. I knew those hands too well. I knew the way they crept under my blanket when the house was quiet, The way he would press a finger to his lips and whisper, "Shh, it's just a game." I knew the sound of the door closing behind him, the way he always locked it, just in case. The first time it happened, I was 9. The last time, I was 16. The only reason it stopped was because I stopped talking. I stopped laughing. I stopped being a person in that house. I became a shadow in my own life. My mother noticed, of course. Mothers always know. But she chose not to see. She chose him. So I ran. I sold the only valuable thing I had, a necklace my grandmother gave me before she died. I told people I was going to the city to find work. I boarded a bus with a backpack, $20, and a lie I had to believe. The journey to the border was a blur of checkpoints, bus terminals, and fear. I kept my head down, avoided eye contact, and slept with my arms wrapped around my bag. The moment I crossed into the desert, I left behind the girl I was. I buried her in the sand. Arriving in Texas felt like stepping into another world. Everything was loud, fast, overwhelming. The buildings were tall, the streets wide. The language, a constant hum I couldn't decode. I found a woman from my hometown in a laundromat. She recognized the way I said certain words and asked me if I needed help. I nodded. That's how it begins for most of us. A nod, a favor, a chain of women passing survival down like heirlooms. She gave me a place to sleep, just a corner in her room with a thin mattress and a shared fan. I worked for her cousin cleaning motel rooms. The smell of bleach, mold, and cigarette smoke became my morning coffee. The sheets were stained with stories I didn't want to know. I cleaned everything twice, scrubbed until my hands cracked. But I was grateful, because I was invisible. And in those early days, invisibility was protection. Every day was the same. Wake up before the sun, walk 5 blocks to the bus stop, clean rooms until my back screamed, eat rice with beans in silence, sleep, repeat. I didn't have time to feel lonely. I didn't allow myself. Emotions were dangerous. They made you soft. I couldn't afford soft. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I would think about the girl I used to be, the one who loved to dance barefoot in the rain, the one who read stories by candlelight and believed in magic. I missed her, but I didn't mourn her, because survival demanded sacrifice, and I had already given up so much to be here. Eventually, I learned enough English to understand the signs on the buses. I figured out which neighborhoods were safe, which stores didn't ask too many questions. I started saving money. Not much, but enough to send a little back home. My mother never asked how I earned it. She just thanked me. Every time. Like a transaction we both understood, but never acknowledged. I kept working. I kept hiding. And slowly, I built a life in the cracks of the system. I started baking. It began as something small. A neighbor asked me to help decorate a cake for her daughter's quinceañera. I had no experience, but I said yes. I stayed up all night watching videos on how to pipe flowers with a plastic bag. The next day, she handed me $40 and told everyone she knew. Soon, I was baking from a tiny kitchen with a broken oven and no air conditioning. I made cakes for baptisms, weddings, baby showers. People came to me because I didn't charge much and I didn't ask questions. I worked with music in the background and flour on my face. And for the first time in years, I felt joy. There was something magical about creating beauty from basic ingredients. Eggs, sugar, flour, nothing fancy. But in my hands, they became something more. Something people smiled about. Something people celebrated with. It was the opposite of everything I had known. People began to know my name. Not the one on any government list, but the name whispered at family parties. Lucía, the one who makes the cakes. That was enough. And then Mateo came. He wasn't planned. He wasn't easy. But he was mine. The pregnancy was hard. I had no insurance, no prenatal care. I worked until my water broke on a bus. The driver didn't speak Spanish, but he saw the pain in my eyes. He pulled over, called for help, and waited with me. His kindness felt like a miracle. Mateo was born in a public hospital under bright lights and hushed conversations. The nurses spoke softly, but looked worried. I was questioned. I lied. I said the father was gone, that I had no family. It wasn't a lie entirely, not in the ways that mattered. But Mateo was healthy. He was perfect. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. I named him after my grandfather, a man who never touched his wife without asking, a man who sang to his goats and cried when his cat died, a man who showed me what gentle looked like. Mateo was my promise to never become a ghost again. I held him and whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep, that he would be safe, that he would be loved, that I would never let anyone hurt him the way I had been hurt. If you've ever had to become someone else just to survive, if you've ever built a life from nothing but grit and grace, I want to hear your story. Leave a comment with the words, "I had to disappear to live," because there's strength in saying it out loud. And if these stories resonate with you, hit subscribe. Not for me, but for every mother still walking through the dark with hope in her heart. The fear was never loud. It didn't scream. It didn't bang on doors or flash sirens in my face. It whispered. It breathed behind my neck while I folded Mateo's clothes. It lingered in the hallway when I took out the trash. It curled up beside me when I closed my eyes at night. I lived with it like one lives with a chronic illness. You stop asking if it will go away. You just learn how to move around it. For years, I structured my life not around freedom, but around not being found. I never left the house unless I had to. Grocery trips were timed to hours when stores were quiet. I knew which aisles had security cameras and which cashiers didn't ask questions. I memorized the layout of every dollar store in a 5-mile radius. I could tell you which corner store sold milk without asking for ID and which ones whispered to the wrong ears. We never stayed in one place too long. Every 2 years, I packed our lives into boxes labeled with numbers instead of names. Furniture was always second-hand, easy to sell if we needed to disappear. I paid rent in cash and kept the receipts in a shoebox under the sink, just in case. When we moved into a new apartment, the first thing I did was test how quickly I could leave through the back window. We didn't own a car, too many risks. Registration, insurance, traffic stops, one wrong signal, one forgotten brake light, and it could all end. Instead, I walked everywhere. Pushed Mateo in a stroller through the heat and the rain and the cold. I kept baby wipes in my bag, not just for him, but to wipe sweat from our faces when the Texas sun felt like fire on our skin. Every day had rules. Never open the door unless you know who it is. If you hear sirens, stay still. If someone calls asking questions, hang up. If you feel something is wrong, trust your instinct. Fear sharpens your senses. It teaches you to feel danger before it arrives. I used burner phones, changed numbers often, didn't post pictures of Mateo online, didn't write my full name on school forms unless absolutely necessary. When they asked for emergency contacts, I wrote down fake numbers. I had no one else, no one I could trust. Mateo knew the rules too, not because I wanted him to, but because he had to. He learned early not to ask why we didn't have a car, or why we moved so much, or why we never traveled. Instead, he started asking how he could help pack. He got good at folding clothes, taping boxes, labeling things with markers. Just in case, I told him. Always be ready. He never had sleepovers. Not because no one invited him, but because I couldn't bear the thought of him being gone if something happened. I needed to know that if someone came knocking, he would be with me. Close enough to hide, close enough to hold. I taught him a code word, a simple phrase we used whenever something felt off. Let's check the oven. He would know to go to the closet, crawl behind the shoes, and wait until I called him twice. Only twice. That was our signal. That was our lifeline. Once, when he was 6, we were walking home from the library, and a police car drove by slowly. Just a normal patrol. But Mateo reached for my hand and whispered, "Do we need to check the oven?" I smiled and said no, but inside, I broke. Because no child should have to live like that. But we did. We had no choice. Some nights, after Mateo fell asleep, I would sit by the window and look out at the streetlights. I'd see families walking their dogs, laughing, taking pictures, living lives that looked like freedom. And I wondered what that felt like. To be relaxed, to be spontaneous, to not think 3 steps ahead, just to survive one. I missed having mail with my name on it. I missed walking into a place and showing an ID without fear. I missed the idea that tomorrow could be safe. There was a time when I dreamed of studying to become a nurse. I used to practice wrapping Mateo's scraped knees like I was preparing for exams. But the truth is, I could never go to school, couldn't risk the attention, couldn't fill out the forms, couldn't open the doors it would take to step inside a classroom. So I turned those dreams into survival plans. I learned basic first aid from YouTube. I taught myself how to make cough syrup with honey and lemon, how to treat fevers with cool compresses. I had a medicine drawer organized like a mini pharmacy. I had copies of every document that mattered, laminated and sealed in a Ziploc bag. I had a list of Mateo's allergies and blood type written in both English and Spanish, tucked into his backpack. I couldn't protect him from everything, but I could prepare. Because when you live in the shadows, you stop waiting for the world to help you. You become your own rescue plan. People who have never lived this way think it's dramatic, paranoid. They say things like, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. They don't understand that fear is not always about guilt. Sometimes it's about history, about knowing that people like you don't get second chances. That one mistake, one missed detail can cost you everything. That's why I never let myself relax, not even for a second. Even at home, I kept the curtains drawn. Even on holidays, I didn't light candles that could attract attention. Even when Mateo begged for decorations on Halloween, I only let him carve a pumpkin once. We put it on the kitchen table instead of outside. It was safer. He didn't complain. He never complained. But I saw it. The way he watched the other kids from the window. The way he asked if maybe next year we could have a real Christmas tree. The way he hugged me a little tighter when I told him we couldn't go to the school field trip because I couldn't sign the forms. I hated lying. I hated the look in his eyes when I said, maybe next time, and we both knew there wouldn't be one. But more than that, I hated the truth, that his life was limited because of mine. Still, he never blamed me. He would come home from school and tell me about his day with a smile. He would draw pictures of us flying in rockets, dancing on the moon, building houses out of cake. He believed in impossible things, and he made me want to believe in them too. So I kept baking. I filled our tiny apartment with the smell of vanilla and cinnamon and sugar. I made cookies shaped like stars and dinosaurs and letters from his name. I told him that flour was magic, that when you mixed it with the right things, it could turn into joy. That was our world, not perfect, not easy, but filled with love. And yet, no matter how much love we poured into it, the fear never left. It lingered in the corners, waiting. And in my heart, I knew it was only a matter of time before it found a way in. If this speaks to you, if you've ever lived in constant alertness, share your voice in the comments. Write, I've lived in the silence, and let others know they're not alone. And if these truths need a place to be heard, subscribe. Your support helps us be seen in a world that often chooses not to look. The moment I heard the door close behind me at the detention center, a question began to burn inside me. It wasn't how long I would be held or what would happen next. It was who. Who told them where I was? Who gave them my name, my address, my exact location on the very day I dared to celebrate? For days, I replayed every interaction in my mind like a crime scene. I hadn't applied for anything risky. I hadn't contacted any agencies. I had been so careful, always. So where did the leak come from? Who was watching while I danced with my son in the kitchen that morning? I didn't have many people in my life. That was by design. I had lived too long knowing that safety only existed when your life was invisible. But family? That's supposed to be sacred. That's supposed to be safe. So when the guards handed me a manila envelope with a copy of the warrant, I felt my knees go weak. Not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. There was no mistake. No confusion. My full name, my home address, my employer's contact, my weekly schedule. Someone close to me had written this report. Someone who knew me. Someone I had trusted. It took days for the truth to surface. Weeks of silence. Then the lawyer, the one who visited me with tired eyes and a firm voice, said it clearly. It was my brother, my older brother, the one I had sent money to for years, the one I used to braid hair with as kids under the mango tree, the one who held my hand the day our father died. That brother. He had filed the complaint. The lawyer showed me the digital submission, the email trail, the sworn statement that claimed I was living and working illegally in Dallas, that I was a burden on the system and unwilling to integrate. I read those words over and over, unable to believe they came from the same person I once protected from my stepfather's fists. My stomach turned cold. He had used me. All those years I sent money, answered his late-night calls, bought school supplies for his daughters when he couldn't. He said thank you. He called me his angel. He promised he'd visit someday. He never did, and now I understood why. He was applying for residency. He needed to prove cooperation, good moral character, contribution to the safety of the community. And what better way to show that than to hand over someone who had no legal papers, no defense, and no power? He traded my life for a green card. And the cruelest part? He did it on Mateo's birthday. There are betrayals that slice clean. This was not one of them. This was a slow bleed, a dull ache that spread through every memory I had of him. I remembered how we used to watch American TV shows dubbed in Spanish, pretending one day we'd live in big cities, have big dreams. I remembered his laugh, how he used to sneak me candies when our mother wasn't looking. I remembered how, when I left for the border, he gave me a cheap pendant and said, "Don't forget who you are." I hadn't, but clearly he had. That pendant? I had kept it, tucked in a small jewelry box behind my baking supplies. I had planned to give it to Mateo one day, not because it had value, but because it came from someone I thought loved me. Now it felt like poison. I sat in that cold detention cell and tried to make sense of it, tried to justify it somehow. Maybe he was desperate. Maybe he didn't know what would happen to me. Maybe. But that word did nothing to soften the blow, because choices matter. And he chose to betray me. He didn't just betray me. He betrayed Mateo, a little boy who called him Tio, who asked why he never visited, who once drew a picture of us all having dinner together under fairy lights and wrote "My family" across the top. I tore that picture the night I found out, not because I hated him, but because I couldn't let myself believe in that dream anymore. There is something particularly cruel about betrayal wrapped in family. It shakes your foundation, makes you question your worth, your judgment, your memories. It makes you afraid to trust again. And that fear is even more isolating than the walls of a cell. I began to withdraw inside. I stopped talking to the other women. I stopped eating. My body was still there, but my spirit had retreated. There was nothing left to protect, not even dignity, until I remembered Mateo, his eyes, his voice, his little hands gripping mine at night. He didn't know what his uncle had done. He didn't know why his mother had vanished, but he was waiting. I knew it. He was waiting, and I could not let betrayal define me. So I asked the lawyer to look deeper. I wanted every detail. I wanted to see the paper trail. I wanted to understand exactly how someone who once called me sister could look into a camera and say I was a danger. And what we found was even darker. It wasn't just my brother. He had worked with a notary, someone who posed as an immigration consultant, someone known in certain communities for helping people file documents in exchange for favors, money, tips, names. He had traded me like currency, a favor for a signature, a sister for status. It made me sick, but it also gave me fuel, because now I knew, and knowing is power. I began documenting everything, every message I had from him, every transfer I sent, every phone call, every photo. I made a folder for the lawyer and labeled it "Proof I Mattered." It may sound dramatic, but for someone like me, paper is power. Evidence is armor. Stories are shields. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you thought would protect you, if you've ever had to piece yourself back together after realizing love does not always mean loyalty, share your truth. Comment with the words, "My pain has a name," because you deserve to be heard. We all do. And if you believe in turning wounds into witnesses, subscribe. Not just to listen, but to be part of a space where stories like ours find the dignity they were denied. It was strange how quickly your body learns to exist in captivity. Within hours, the walls stopped feeling foreign. The smell of bleach, sweat, and institutional despair settled into your skin like an unwanted perfume. The lights never went off, not fully. Even when they dimmed, they hummed above our heads like a warning that sleep would never come easy. There were no clocks, no sense of time. Meals arrived in plastic trays that could have been breakfast or dinner. We guessed the hour based on the temperature of the food and the mood of the guards. Some women counted days with marks on the wall. I didn't. I stopped needing to know how many mornings had passed without Mateo's voice. The cell I shared was small. Concrete floor, steel bunks, a toilet with no privacy. They called it a pod, like it was something safe and secure. But it was just a box that muted our lives. I shared it with 2 other women. One barely spoke English. The other barely spoke at all. We communicated in glances, in borrowed phrases, in the shared language of survival. At night, I would wrap myself in the thin blanket they gave us and close my eyes, pretending it was Mateo's old comforter, the one with stars and spaceships. I imagined his voice telling me about school, his excitement over spelling bees and soccer games. I tried to hold on to the sound of him saying "mommy," like it was his favorite word. The first few days, I asked the guards for updates. Could I call someone? Could I send a letter? Could I just let my son know I was alive? They said maybe. Later. Not now. Eventually, I stopped asking. We were treated like we were already gone, like we didn't exist beyond that building, as if being undocumented meant being undeserving of humanity. The guards didn't hit us. They didn't scream, but their silence cut deeper than cruelty. They avoided our eyes, handed us meals like we were ghosts. We were watched but not seen, counted but not acknowledged, processed like packages in a warehouse. Some women prayed, others rocked themselves to sleep. Some fought back, argued, demanded. But most of us, we just went quiet. It wasn't just the confinement that broke us. It was the stripping of dignity. Being told when to eat, when to sleep, when to shower. Being forced to wear the same pale uniform every day. No makeup, no earrings, no mirrors. You forget what you look like. And then you forget who you are. One afternoon, during what they called recreation, I sat in the yard surrounded by concrete walls and razor wire. The sun felt unfamiliar. I watched a bird land on the edge of the fence and wondered if it knew how lucky it was. I hadn't seen a tree in weeks. I hadn't touched grass. I had forgotten what flowers smelled like. A woman beside me whispered, "My son just turned 5. Her voice cracked. They didn't even let me call. I nodded, but said nothing. What could I say? That I knew? That I understood? We all did. And that knowing sat heavy between us. A grief so personal and yet so collective, it almost felt sacred. We weren't just women. We were mothers, daughters, sisters, each with someone waiting, each with a life paused on the other side of those walls. I began to write letters in my head, to Mateo, to my mother, to myself. I imagined what I would say if I got the chance. I crafted stories out of memories. I rewrote the past to give myself strength. Dear Mateo, today I remembered the time you made me laugh so hard I dropped an entire tray of cupcakes. You were 3. You said the frosting looked like clouds and tried to eat it with your face. Sometimes I whispered those letters into my pillow, like a prayer, like maybe my words could find him in the wind. The worst part wasn't the boredom, it was the waiting. Waiting for news, for paperwork, for the next step. Nobody told you what was happening. You just existed, day by day, in a system designed to make you disappear slowly. Then one morning they called my name, Lucía Martínez. I froze. My legs refused to move. One of the guards snapped her fingers. Let's go. They walked me down a hallway, past closed doors and eyes that didn't meet mine. I was brought into a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs. The lawyer was there. He didn't smile. He looked tired, pale, like he hadn't slept either. He handed me a paper. You have 30 days, he said, unless we can appeal. I read the words slowly. Voluntary departure, deportation, final notice, 30 days. 30 days to pack up a life. 30 days to say goodbye. 30 days to prepare a child to lose everything. But how do you prepare a child to lose their mother? The lawyer spoke again, softer this time. We might have one chance. A motion to stay. Based on Mateo, his birth certificate, his right to stay. I looked at him, barely breathing. Is there hope? He didn't answer directly. There's paperwork, and maybe a sympathetic judge. Maybe. That word again. I signed the form. What else could I do? It was either fight or vanish. And I had promised Mateo I'd never leave without a fight. That night, I cried for the first time in days, not because I was afraid, but because I knew what was at stake. I cried for the life we built in secret. For every birthday party, every bedtime story, every sidewalk chalk drawing we had made together. I cried for the walls that now stood between us and the cruel machinery that threatened to erase it all. But I also cried with something else in my chest. Anger. It was quiet, steady, sharp. Not the kind that makes you scream, but the kind that makes you stand. The kind that fuels mothers who've lost too much already. The kind that turns fear into resistance. If you have ever sat in silence while the world forgot you, if you have ever screamed into a pillow because it was the only safe place left, I see you. Leave a comment with the words, "I won't disappear," because your presence matters. Your story matters. And if you believe no one should vanish without being heard, subscribe. This is more than a channel. It's a memory, a voice, a stand. When they let me call him, my hands shook so much I could barely hold the phone. It had been 16 days. 16 sunrises without seeing his smile. 16 nights without reading him his bedtime story or whispering that he was safe. When the line connected, there was a second of silence before I heard his breath. A soft, confused inhale. "Mateo," I whispered, like his name was the only thing holding me together. "Mama?" His voice cracked, like he'd been holding it in too long. I broke. Tears ran silently down my face as I struggled to keep my voice calm. I didn't want him to hear me fall apart. But how do you tell a child that you're okay when your world is dissolving? "Where are you?" he asked. I paused. "I'm in a place where they're asking me a lot of questions," I said, choosing each word carefully. "But I'm okay, and I'm thinking of you every second." There was a pause on his end. Then quietly, "Did I do something wrong?" That question ripped through me like glass. "No, my love," I said quickly. No. This is not because of you. This is because some people don't understand our story. But we are going to fix it. I promise. Are you coming home?" That word, home. I didn't know what that meant anymore. But I said yes, because that's what mothers do. We say yes, even when the truth is buried beneath mountains of uncertainty. I told him to keep reading, to keep drawing, to help Miss Rosa with the garden like we planned. I told him to remember what I always said, that courage isn't about never being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are. He asked if he could send me one of his drawings. I closed my eyes and pictured it before he even described it. A house, a cake, 2 people holding hands under a big sun. I said yes. I told him I would hang it next to my bed. The call ended too soon. It always does. But those 5 minutes stitched something back together inside me. I started fighting harder after that. Not just for me, but for Mateo. I spoke to the lawyer every chance I got. I gathered every document I could think of. Birth certificates, school awards, letters from families I had worked for, photos of us celebrating holidays, baking together, doing homework on the kitchen floor. I wrote a declaration. My story, in my words. I wrote it in Spanish and translated it into English with help from a volunteer. I didn't hold back. I wrote about my childhood, about crossing the desert, about the fear, the sacrifices, and the love that shaped every decision I ever made. We submitted everything. Then we waited. That wait was its own kind of prison. Every day I looked for signs, a guard walking faster, a paper in their hand, a whisper between staff members. Nothing. Just more silence. But one afternoon, they brought me to a different room. Not the cold interview cell, but a slightly warmer space with a dusty chair and a box of tissues on the table. The lawyer sat down across from me and took a deep breath. "There's been movement," he said. I clenched the edge of the table. "The stay request is still under review, but a reporter is asking questions." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "A journalist. She somehow heard about your case, the birthday, the arrest, the betrayal. She wants to speak with you." My instinct was to say no. Talking to the media meant exposure, and exposure had always meant danger. But something stopped me. Maybe it was Mateo's voice in my ear. Maybe it was the memory of all the other women I had met behind those walls, each one erased by a system that thrived on silence. Maybe I was just tired of hiding. So I said yes. They arranged a phone call. I spoke with the journalist for 20 minutes. Her voice was gentle, but her questions were sharp. She wanted to understand everything. Not just the facts, but the feeling of it all. What it meant to live afraid, to be betrayed by family, to be torn from your child on the one day you let yourself hope. I told her everything. At the end of the call, she said, "People need to hear this." I didn't know if I believed that, but a part of me wanted it to be true. A week later, the article came out. I didn't see it myself, but another detainee showed me a copy printed from the internet. It had my name, Mateo's name. A photo of the cake I had baked for his birthday, taken from my old phone, shared by a friend who had somehow held on to it. The title read, "A Mother's Worst Birthday." The story spread. I could feel it. More phone calls came. Human rights groups started asking questions. Even some local politicians got involved. The guards began treating me differently. They didn't smile, but they didn't ignore me anymore either. The lawyer visited again. He looked more hopeful than I'd ever seen him. "They're listening," he said. It didn't mean I was free, but it meant I was no longer invisible. And that changed everything. There is power in being seen, even when it terrifies you, even when it costs you sleep and safety, because being seen means someone cares enough to look, and in a system built to erase you, that alone is a small rebellion. So, I kept speaking. I wrote another letter to Mateo, this time not in my head, but on paper. I told him I was fighting, that strangers were helping us, that his mommy had found her voice. I drew a small sun in the corner, like the one he always drew for me. I said, "When you feel afraid, look at the sun. That's where my love lives." If you've ever had to choose between silence and survival, if you've ever found courage in the cracks of despair, share your truth in the comments. Write, "I chose to be seen." Let that be your echo. And if you believe stories like this are worth fighting for, subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but for the women who still have no names in the news. I held that wrinkled piece of paper in my trembling hands, the one with his name printed under mine, and I remembered the moment I thought I had found safety. I had believed the promise of freedom in a new country, believed my sacrifice would buy security for my little boy, and believed that the fear that haunted us could one day rest. But hope is never bulletproof. It is porous. It leaks. It bends. It bends until something gives. When I walked into the courtroom that day, I wore a dress I bought on payday. It was blue, soft cotton, modest and clean. But to me, it felt like armor. I sat on that chair and watched as the judge flipped through pages, asked the lawyer questions, looked at the photocopies I had brought, the certificate from Mateo's school showing his perfect attendance, the pictures of us celebrating Christmas with other families, the receipts for money I had sent home to Oaxaca. I looked out the window at a tree I could not touch, and a bird that flew freely, wondering how it knew the world beyond the cage I lived in. When the judge asked why I had come to this country, I spoke in the voice of every woman whose footsteps echo in corners where no one is watching. I told about the mango tree in my village. I told about the night I left with only a backpack and my breath pinned to the ground. I told how I made cakes in tiny kitchens, how I sent a part of every paycheck to my mother who waited for the day her daughter would stand tall. And when I told about the face of my son, his 8-year-old heart waiting for his mother to come home, I felt the room change. The lawyer whispered later that judges see metrics. Perfect attendance is a number. Community volunteer hours are a number. But the human voice, the sound of a mother fighting, cannot be quantified. I sat afterward in the hallway, footsteps echoing, and wondered how long someone had listened to my story before it reached a heart. I walked back to the cell that day feeling something unfamiliar. Relief. But even relief tastes strange behind bars, because it means you are still here waiting. The next morning they called me for processing. I packed my small belongings, photos of Mateo in his blue crown, a drawing of a rocket ship with our names on it, and a necklace from my grandmother I had almost forgotten. I tucked them into a Ziploc bag and held it close like it held my soul. I took a shower in cold water, ignoring how the tiles felt like steel. I dressed in the uniform they gave me, pale green, my name and A number pinned to the front. At the yard, I watched other mothers. One held a photo of her son who lived with relatives. Another hummed lullabies beneath her breath. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We recognized the fear and hope in each other's eyes. That afternoon, an officer came and said I could see Mateo on video. In the small visitation room, I pushed a chair close to the monitor. I searched for his face, his smile, and there he was. He waved. He had colored a new drawing. Crayons scribbled like fireworks. I saw him hold up the paper. The sun. A rocket ship. 2 figures. I recognized us under the big yellow circle. "Mama," he said. That one word cracked something open inside me. He told me he was learning multiplication. He wanted to be a lawyer one day so he could help people like me. I wanted to throw my arms around the screen. Instead, I told him he was brave. I told him I loved him, and I told him to keep the drawing ready, because someday we would hang it together. When the session ended, my legs felt too weak to stand. I thought I would crumble, but something held me upright. A promise I had made when he was born. I would never leave him without fighting. That night I closed my eyes and saw us. In a house without locks, in a garden with green grass, in a world where the word deportation didn't exist. I didn't know how we'd get there. I didn't know if I'd be the one to carry us, but I knew that we had started moving. If you have ever watched someone you love through a screen and wondered if it will ever be real again, share your story. Type, "I am waiting too" below so our voices can meet. And if you believe in justice and journey through darkness, subscribe. Every subscription is a light in a place built on shadows. The day they opened the gate and called my name, something inside me locked up instead of unlocking. I had waited for that moment, prayed for it, imagined it in 100 different ways. But when it came, I didn't feel joy. I felt fear. A female guard handed me a bag with my belongings. Clothes folded with no care, shoes stuffed like afterthoughts. My documents, a few crumpled pictures of Mateo, the small gold necklace with the letter M that I thought I'd lost. She told me I had 15 minutes to change, sign the forms, and walk out. Walk out. It sounded so simple. But freedom after captivity doesn't land gently. It crashes. I dressed slowly, my hands stiff and unsure, like they forgot how to move for anything but survival. The clothes didn't fit like I remembered. Even my own jeans felt foreign against my skin, like someone else's life. At the final door, I signed my name on a release sheet. The pen slipped in my hand. It had been so long since I'd written freely. I stared at the letters of my name and felt a strange mix of pride and grief. Lucía, a name that had survived things most people wouldn't believe. Outside, the sun hit me like a slap. It was too bright, too wide. The sky looked unreal. I had dreamed of this moment, but the world felt too fast, too loud. I wanted to cry, but I had no tears left. There was no welcome party, no camera crews, no celebration. Just me, a backpack, and a paper that said I had 90 days to appear in court again. I took a deep breath and stepped off the curb. A volunteer from a local advocacy group had agreed to meet me. Her name was Karina. She wore a yellow cardigan and held a coffee cup like it was a torch. When she saw me, she didn't ask questions. She just opened her arms, and I fell into them. She drove me to a small apartment that belonged to a church member who opened her doors for women like me. The walls were beige. The couch smelled like lavender. The silence inside was gentle, not hollow. For the first time in months, I slept in a bed with sheets. I didn't dream that night. I just drifted. The next morning, I called Mateo. He answered on the first ring. "Mama?" His voice sounded older, like the weeks apart had stretched him. He told me he had kept drawing every day, that he had written my name on every picture, that he told his teacher I was coming back and she said she'd pray for us. He asked if I was safe now. I paused. Then I said, "I'm here. That means we are halfway safe." I wasn't ready to explain everything, that I was out but not free, that I could still be sent back, that I was only a court date away from being erased again. But I didn't need to tell him. He understood. Children like Mateo grow up fast in the shadows. We arranged to meet that weekend. Karina said she'd drive me. I stared at the date circled on the calendar, like it was a miracle waiting to happen. In the meantime, I had to rebuild from nothing. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a bank account. I didn't have an ID, but I had time and a little bit of space. And the most dangerous thing a system like this fears: a voice. Karina helped me contact a pro bono legal team. They took my case and began building a new appeal. The argument was simple. I was a mother of a U.S. citizen child. I had roots in the community. I had no criminal record. And the harm of separating us again would be irreparable. We gathered letters from Mateo's teachers, from the families I had cleaned houses for, from the church I sometimes visited. Each one said the same thing in different words: she belongs here. I also began attending support groups, rooms filled with other women who had walked through the same fire. We didn't need to explain our silences, our scars, our habits. We recognized them in each other. One woman, Alma, said something that stuck with me. "They let us go," she said, "but they don't expect us to rise." That was it. That was the truth. They thought release was enough, that giving us back the sky would stop us from remembering the cage. But what they didn't know was that surviving makes you louder, not smaller. I began to speak more, to write, to share. I gave an interview to a local podcast. The host was gentle, but direct. She asked what it felt like to be betrayed by family, what it was like to have your son watch your world collapse. I answered every question with the calm of someone who had nothing left to lose. I said, "Betrayal breaks bones you didn't know could hurt, but love rebuilds them." I said, "I don't know if I'll stay, but I know I won't go quietly." That episode got shared across forums. Other women began writing me. Some said thank you. Some said they had never spoken about what happened to them until now. One woman sent a photo of her son drawing a son just like Mateo's. She said, "You reminded me that I'm still a mother, even if I'm still fighting." That was the moment I understood that my story wasn't just mine. It was a map for others, a torch in the dark, a reminder that even the broken can lead. I still had nights when I couldn't sleep, when the sound of footsteps outside made my heart race, when I flinched at the knock on a door. Trauma doesn't leave gently. It lingers. It hides in corners. But I was learning to live beside it without letting it define me. And as the court date approached, I realized something else. This wasn't about proving I was harmless. It was about proving I mattered. And if you're listening to this, and you've ever had to start from zero while carrying the weight of everything that nearly crushed you, speak your truth. Type, "I'm still here," in the comments. Because your presence is resistance. And if you want these stories to keep finding the ones who need them, subscribe. Not because it helps a channel, but because it helps someone else believe they're not alone. The morning of the court hearing, I woke up before the sun. The sky outside the window was still wrapped in gray, like it too hadn't decided if it was ready to rise. I stood in front of the mirror in the borrowed bathroom, brushing my hair slowly, tying it back the way my mother used to when I was a girl. I wanted to look steady, calm, like someone they couldn't erase. I put on a plain black dress, no jewelry, just the gold chain with Mateo's little letter M hidden under my collar. I looked at my reflection and whispered a quiet prayer, not for a miracle, but for strength, the kind that doesn't crack under silence. Karina drove me to the courthouse. The streets looked normal, people walking dogs, sipping coffee, waiting at red lights. All of it too ordinary for a day that felt like it might decide my future. Inside the courtroom, the air was colder than I remembered. The judge wasn't the same one from before. This one looked stern, but not cruel. The kind of face that listens before it reacts. That gave me hope, but only a little. The government attorney started by reciting facts like bullets. My undocumented entry, my years without status, the detainment, the notice of deportation. They didn't mention Mateo by name, just called him the child, as if he were a line on a form, not a boy with dreams and a favorite soccer team. Then my lawyer stood. He spoke clearly, firmly. He described me not as a case, but as a person, a mother, a worker, a neighbor. He handed the judge photos, school certificates, letters, the article from the journalist, the petition signed by over 3,000 people asking for a stay. He read parts of my declaration, my own words, the ones I had written in the dark. When he spoke about Mateo, I looked down. I didn't want the judge to see me cry, but my hands were shaking. The lawyer ended with a line I'll never forget. He said, "We ask the court not just to review the law, but to remember the cost of its silence. This child has already lost too much." Then it was my turn. They asked if I had anything to say. I stood. My legs felt like paper. I looked at the judge and spoke slowly. I told him I came here because I believed in safety, that I worked every day to give my son a life without fear, that I didn't want pity. I wanted fairness. I said, "I am not asking to skip the line. I am asking not to be erased from my own child's life." I ended with a truth I had carried since the beginning. My son was born on this soil, but he was raised by love, and that love has my name on it. When I sat back down, the room was silent. The judge took notes, nodded, then said he would issue a written decision in the coming days. That was it. No final answer. Just a waiting room in disguise. Back outside, the light was too sharp. I blinked against it. Karina held my arm. We didn't speak on the way home. We didn't have to. The next few days were unbearable. Every knock on the door made my heart leap. Every unknown number on my phone made my palms sweat. I cooked to keep my hands busy. I folded laundry like the fabric would whisper comfort. I read Mateo his bedtime stories over video call, pretending everything was normal. I told him I would be there soon, but I didn't know if that was true. Then the call came. My lawyer's voice was tense, but steady. "We got it," he said. I didn't understand at first. He repeated, "The judge granted a stay." The words floated in the air like a song I wasn't sure I was allowed to hear. I was not being deported. Not now. Not today. My knees gave out. I sat on the kitchen floor and cried into my hands, not because the fight was over, but because for the first time, I had space to breathe. Later that night, Mateo and I danced in our separate homes. I played his favorite song on speaker. He wiggled around with his stuffed dog and told me, "I knew it, Mama. I knew they would let you stay." That was the moment I realized that even hope learns to speak. I knew this wasn't the end. The stay was temporary. There would be more hearings, more papers, more waiting. But I had something I didn't before. A record, a community, a name that people now remembered. And most of all, time. Time with my son. Time to rebuild. The next day, I got a job cleaning offices at night. Quiet work. Steady work. Honest work. It didn't matter what I did. It mattered that I was here to do it. I also started attending community meetings, speaking when asked, helping others file their papers, sharing my story not as a warning, but as a thread of possibility. One day, a young girl came up to me after I spoke. She said, "My mom is still inside, but your story makes me think she can come home too." I hugged her, and in that moment, I knew that survival becomes purpose when it is shared. If you have ever waited for someone to say your name like it mattered, or fought to stay visible in a world that tried to forget you, write it in the comments. Say, "I am not a shadow." Let others find your light. And if you believe that voices like mine deserve to echo, subscribe. Not just for me, but for the next mother who needs to know she's not invisible. There are moments in life that never quite leave your body. You carry them not in your memory, but in your breath, your bones, the way your shoulders curve at the sound of a knock on the door. I carry that birthday, that cake, that knock, the cold feel of metal on my wrists, the silence of Mateo's eyes watching from the hallway. That moment became the line between who I was and who I had to become. But here I am, still breathing, still standing. Not every day has been light. Some mornings I wake up and have to remind myself that I am not back in that cell, that the walls are no longer pressing in, that Mateo's laughter from the other room is real, not a memory I'm clinging to. I still flinch when I see police lights. I still lower my voice when I speak Spanish in public, but those instincts don't own me anymore. They are reminders of what I've survived, not chains holding me down. Mateo is growing so fast. His shoes don't fit for long. His questions are sharper. Sometimes he asks about that day, about what happened, why, and I always tell him the truth, shaped gently by love. I tell him his mother was taken from him, but she found a way back. I tell him that justice is not always swift, but that truth, when spoken enough times, starts to echo. He keeps every drawing he made while I was gone in a folder. The sun with our names, the rocket ship, the house with 2 stick figures holding hands. He added a new one last week, a courtroom with a big heart above it. He said, "This one's for the judge who listened." And I think about that often. About the people who chose to listen. The woman who wrote the article. The ones who signed the petition. The ones who sent notes to my lawyer. The strangers who said my name when I couldn't say it loud enough myself. To all of you who listened to this story, who stayed until the end, who let my voice live in your ears for a few minutes of your day, thank you. You have no idea what that means to someone who was once forgotten. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. There are still hearings ahead, still paperwork, still fear. But there is also community, connection, resistance, and that is what saves us. It's not just about one woman's freedom. It's about all the others still waiting for their names to be called, still trying to hold on to hope in rooms where no one looks them in the eyes. So if you're still here, watching, listening, holding space for this story, please leave a comment below, share your voice, write, "No one disappears on my watch," because your words, just like mine, matter. And if this story touched you, if it made you cry, or made you think of someone you love, or made you want to do more, please subscribe, not for me, for the next voice waiting to be heard, for the next mother, the next daughter, the next family that needs to know someone is listening. Thank you for your heart, for your time, for the quiet power of your empathy. Click on the next video that's about to appear. There's another story waiting there. And maybe, just maybe, it's the one that will make someone feel seen for the first time. Until then, remember this. I was taken. I was silenced. I was nearly erased. But I am still here. And so are you.